All right, welcome to everyone for our second class. Especially thanks to Alan. Can people see Alan's face for a minute or two? I mean, you're our hero in making everything work, and thanks ever so much. We spent 2 hours last night after class trying to get other things working right, and I deeply appreciate Alan's help. Okay, we also then have been in touch with several other interesting things for today that I think we'll announce them one by one as they're getting started. There are also a number of new folks. Anything organizationally that any student wants to ask, that is, I guess we all have technical issues, but is there anything more general about the course and how we're organizing it, which might be more general, that we should discuss, that's on the mind of any of the students today, right now? Anybody want to raise your hand or just unmute and speak to us?
Yeah, students can also raise your hand, and TAs would call some of the name if more than 2 students raise hand.
Or if you just, yeah, okay. And then just if you put your cursor on your, okay, then you can unmute yourself. And okay, no questions or comments. All right. Well, that's a good sign. I didn't mention it explicitly, but we will have office hours right after these sessions. Certainly on Monday, and at the beginning, Monday and Wednesday today as well. We'll stay on afterward. And in terms of teaching assistants, we now have a third teaching assistant, Brendan Swart, who will introduce and who will speak a little bit more today. The idea today in this session is to feature some of the examples of how and why one can move from the more general questions, theories, the bigger analyses of scenes, of aesthetics, of what is transgressive, what is charismatic, these kinds of more general abstract views, and then the specifics like the Beijing airport or the Eiffel Tower or the Millennium Park. How do we get from, or how do we connect the one and the other? Who's doing what, where, why, and how? And this, of course, relates to its theory about policy, but one of the best ways is at least to talk to some of the policy makers, the people who are making these connections. And then we're starting more today. We're not trying to answer all the complicated questions, but we're taking, that is, Monday, we gave you a little overview of some of the bigger theories at the end from the Scenescapes book. I had the path diagrams showing things feeding into scenes and types of scenes. And we've talked about Levi-Strauss and these things as general ideas. But then we showed some specific examples, cases like the Beijing airport. What we have today to start off is, again, some Chinese examples, but most of all, we have a personal, direct connection who is Professor Qi Ji, and who is also an active planner, organizer, policy participant in multiple scenes-related activities in China. And we have the great good fortune of having her here for this year. And she was here on Monday, although she didn't really speak. She's going to talk a bit now, but she's quite modest. But let me just add that as background, she's a professor at the Communications University of China. That's an unusual name. We have no such university in the United States. It's a big institution. It has hundreds of faculty. They're people who are professors of communication and statistics and economics and sociology and tourism and media. So, I mean, it's a combination of a sort of social science division, a public policy, a communications department, all these things sort of put together in an unusual way. But and there's no, I know of no other analog, certainly of this magnitude and seriousness, joining with the best and then having people linked with the best. I mean, based on, as I've looked at some of the activities of the faculty, they're linked with the highest level people around the world doing very cutting edge kinds of things in terms of social science ideas. But in that sense, I would say the spirit of this course aims to be very close to be doing some things like that. But then to have this connect as well with China at the same time that it raises the questions of how and why is Chinese society, because it's also direct, it's in Beijing and it's directly linked with the national government in complicated ways, which illuminate how much the national government is interested in all kinds of things. That is, it's not the Communist Party saying, do this. It's asking, what's on people's minds? What kind of television are people watching? How are the social media being used in ways that I've sometimes said, and this is controversial, but I put it out at least to think about. I didn't come to this at the beginning, but over the years, it may be because the Chinese do not have national elections. And so that leads some in the West to say it's not democratic. Alternatively, one could say precisely because there are not elections, many government officials and political leaders lean over backwards to be more responsive to citizens in different ways than in countries that have contested elections, as in the U.S. or in other places. Now, obviously, that's controversial. There are many other things going on, but I'll simply point out the subtleties of going beyond the simple classifications and leave this as an open question, not as a blanket statement. All right, so let's listen to Kiji. We have after her, we will have Tony Wang. Tony Wang has lived both in China and he went to let's introduce him after. Let's let Professor Kiji get us started. Can you please do so, Professor Kiji?
Professor Kiji, you can share your screen with us if you have a presentation. So if you can move your cursor down, you can see a green.
Share my screen.
If you move your cursor down, there is a share screen. It's green. You click on that.
Not my screen, it's your screen.
Your screen, because your presentation is in your computer.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Here we are.
Excellent. Perfect.
Good afternoon, and today I want to share some thinking about the study of science theory in China. And as is known to all, China's cultural industries have developed rapidly in recent years. And look at this table. Between 2004 and 2018, the cultural industries increased more than tenfold, and especially in 3 areas. The first is digitization. So the digital culture industry has become new dynamic of economics, especially during the outbreak of coronavirus. And there is some data that during the Spring Festival in 2020, Chinese museums held more than 2,000 exhibitions and more than 5 billion visits. So nowadays, digital industries account for 66% of the total output value of culture industries. And the second one is urbanization. So in 1949, China's urbanization rate was only 10%. But after 17 years, it was almost 16%. The urbanization also promotes the development of culture consumption, not only in cities, but also in rural areas. So there are also some data that the rural revitalization is really developed very fast. And the third is contextualized. During the outbreak of COVID-19, more and more customers are choosing online consumption and entertainment. So how to create a comfortable and virtual reality sense are more and more important. That's why more and more Chinese scholars are starting to use sense theory to study the internet industry. And also there, under this three tendencies, especially in the background of COVID-19, Chinese scholars try to explore new theories to help their research on culture industries. And as we know that there are three dimensions of factors in sense, such as in the class on Monday, Professor Clark has shown a table to us. There is the relationship of economic, social, and cultural factors. But in the past, most scholars always use a single dimension to analyze their field. So merely involve other dimensions. And nowadays, China's culture industry developed rapidly, but the theoretical research lags behind the industry development. So the introduction of sense theory has become the very key point of China's culture industries. And here is a table. And over the past 5 years, more than 100 Chinese scholars have published their papers, and they use sense theory to analyze and all as the core theory. And since the outbreak of coronavirus, a lot of emergency industries developed rapidly. These new industries that doesn't have any theory framework. So sense theory has gained more attention again. And here are two pictures. And here are the main research fields of sense theory in China. And look at the first picture. There are 4 keywords that appear most frequently with sense theory, such as cultural participation, urban development, and culture and creative industries, and including the new Chicago School. And there are also 10 major areas of research using sense theory. And from these 2 pictures, we found that sense theory plays a powerful role in explaining the development of creative cities, creative classes, and the creative clusters in China. And here are also 10 major disciplines conduct research through sense theory. And we also found that scholars in different fields using economic, social, and cultural factors to analyze the phenomena and some new problems in their fields. And so sense theory is an active way to promote their research. And next is this diagram shows how sense theory overlaps with other fields. We can see that from cities to public space and from districts to communities. And the space of sense study is getting more and more specific in China. And so it also said that we focus on the space research and also from the specific space to a lot of virtual space. And here is some problem and since theory solved a lot of conflict in China's culture industry. And so since theory and such as how to understand the concept of culture industries and how to enrich the traditional theory and how to deal with the change of culture industries, how to create new perspective and find some new angles of views to study some new phenomena. And at last, there are some open questions we could talk about. So the first three questions are still unsolved questions and in nowadays China's culture industry. But a lot of excellent scholars such as Wang Tong and others are trying to do more in specific fields such as some wonderful topics, the nightlife consumption, the cultural humanities, and the cultural politics. And the application of science is becoming more and more practical in China. So here I give a list. There are some questions we can talk about, and if anybody who are interested in this problem and issues, and we could talk about more. And all these questions are we focused nowadays, and also there are a lot of Chinese scholars focus on these questions to do further studies. So that's what I want to share today. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Well, let me, I need to unmute, I guess.
So Professor Chiji, you can stop sharing. Just click.
Okay.
Yeah, just move the cursor to the green box again.
How to close?
The same place where you click for sharing.
Okay, I saw it.
Okay, perfect.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very, very helpful. And we have a list of questions. I suggest we try to have maybe just a little discussion right now. I mean, she presented lots of material quite quickly. Comments, questions from any of you? This is not what you read in the New York Times. That is one bigger way to put it, which may be underlying.
Peng Shiyi, have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Professor. It's very nice to meet you, and I'm also from China. So I do have a question for you. So I just feel that like in the United States, most of the cultural participation is developed within a specific geographically defined community or neighborhood. Like for example, the leading organization in this neighborhood is very important in organizing those cultural activities. So people have a very strong dependence on their on the area that they are living in. But in China, I just feel that people don't have such feeling of dependence to their neighborhood. They don't care much about. We don't care much about the people who live in next door to us. What we care about is only these tiny space that we are living in. Our family is living in. So what I am asking is that different from the United States, which the cultural participation based very much on the unit of geography, the neighborhood. In China, how do we develop such cultural activities to two people, like if we don't have sort of dependence on our neighborhood?
I think it's a good question, and I always think this question for a long time. Before I came to United States, and I couldn't feel the power of neighborhood. So, in China, we always participate a lot of activities by organization, not depend on the neighborhood. But in America, I think residents are very active to participate in a lot of activities. I think there are two ways to solve this problem. First, it needs time. And now we are work hard for community participation. And there are a lot of scholars publish their papers to analyze the community participation. And sometimes maybe theory also before the practice. And if we promote the community participation, and after a long time, the residents are happy to engage in the participation, and I think it will have a good culture atmosphere and will be change this situation. And second, I think we depend on the internet is a good way. Especially after COVID-19, and a lot of residents living in neighborhoods, they are get together to defend the coronavirus. So they will feel that participation is very important for their community. And after this situation, and if we have some groups online, and I think the cultural participation will be activity in community. And nowadays we use WeChat and other social medias to build a lot of groups. And in these groups, actually we have do a lot in the social media groups. And in the professor class books, they also mention a lot of participation way, and it's some new way participate in the internet. So I think these two ways can solve this problem. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.
We had another hand or two up.
Yeah, we have Chen Zhiling. So,
Can you hear me? I'm Zling. So I just want.
could you turn on your camera so everybody can see?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I just have a question to ask about the neighborhood thing we're just talking about. So, because for me personally, my experience living in China actually contradicts with what I forgot her name, but the other classmates were just talking about. So I wonder, to what standard or to what kind of model are we exactly measuring or comparing to, then leading us to this conclusion of Chinese are not really this kind of neighborhood-driven, community-driven society, or even to have such a claim saying like a Chinese cultural industry is not really driven by community, or I'm just like really confused, like where can we see such a data or such studies to prove such a point, or it's just based on certain people's personal experience?
Yes, I also confused about this question. Why a lot of China's culture industry not driven by community? But now there are some examples in community. You can search 地瓜社区. It's a community, and you can search 地瓜社区 is a good example. The residents living in their community, and they change the old space to be a culture space, and they use this culture space attract a lot of residents living around to participate in. And I think why China's culture industry couldn't drowned by the power of neighborhood or communities. That's just because in the past 20 years, the culture industry's power is also drowned by government. So we should change our opinions, and it also needs a long time to change residents' opinions. They also think cultural spaces for public good service as not their personal activity. And nowadays, a lot of young people, they change their opinions, and they are volunteer in cultural industries, and they involve a lot of power, and they involve a lot of their personal power to engage in community. I think after several years, if some young people become the leader of the community, they will change this situation. And nowadays, in a lot of community, you know, a lot of young people living there, they try to change this situation in China. And also in Beijing, especially in Chaoyang district, a lot of community getting together, a lot of international residents, they are trying to change this situation. Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have Daniel Cho asking a question? Did was there either a follow-up from either of you or from, I think, is Daniel Cho?
Hey, Professor Clark.
Okay. Can you turn on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see a nice big D. But if we could see a face, that'd be even better. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What did you have a comment, Daniel? Question?
As in terms of the comments, I just found the conversations that my two classmates were having to be really interesting, especially regarding, I guess, the information that China has in terms of their, I think they were talking about the community-driven aspect of China and whether or not that's actually happening or whether that's just speculation. And I think that's just a topic that's good to be discussed about, and we should tread carefully around, especially because of this current culture we have right now where China is being ridiculed for not providing enough information to the rest of the world, especially with coronavirus going on. So I'm not sure if I have an opinion myself, but I found that the topics they're discussing to be interesting.
Professor, can you turn on your mic? Unmute. Okay.
Okay, is that working?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, yeah, apologies. And do I need to share screen or you see me okay?
You don't need to share screen.
Okay, that's fine. This is a big question all around the world and within the US. And Chicago is probably the best place to ask this question because this has been a controversial and is a very controversial question in Chicago and globally. Background, when the French were observing from a distance after 1789 that they had had a revolution and they were talking about democracy, equality, and so forth, they said, where is democracy and how can we think about the whole idea? And they sent a young man named Alexis de Tocqueville to America in around 1820 to explore because the French didn't really have any democratic experiences. And when he came back, he wrote a famous book, which is still considered one of the most important books on democracy in the world and in the US. And a key thing which he stressed was average citizen participation in small neighborhood associations, like farmers who got together to fix their fences. And especially the number one type of organization were local churches. And that remains the case today for much of the United States, where churches are much more important, for instance, than in Europe. The Europeans since World War II have become much more secular. If you ask them, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Christianity and so forth? And people say no, that is maybe 30%, 20, 30, 40% at most in most of Europe say yes. In the US, it's maybe 50, 60%. Although it's slow, it's okay. But the second big point is Chicago. Chicago is the most studied city in the world in terms of a city. We've got more. I came to Chicago because of the strong urban work, and I've continued. I created and chaired the urban section of the American Sociological Association and the International Sociological Association. And we had a meeting of the International Sociological Association in Toronto about a year ago. And we had 60 papers addressing this very question from India, from Japan, from France, from Italy, and so forth. And it's controversial, but I'd say, but the point is, the fact that it's controversial is good, one. Two, the facts that it differs internationally from one country to another, but also within the same country, there are big differences. But the degree of variation within a city and within a country across neighborhoods and so forth, these are interesting to analyze. And let me come back to Chicago, as we've been doing an oral history of Chicago, and which is continuing ever since the Harold Washington election. But basically, Chicago is where Tocqueville did not come, and Tocqueville often fails. So what a book on the reading list, which we'll be going over in more detail, so I shouldn't try to summarize too much here, we'll get to it soon, is how different is the Tocquevillian idea that citizen participation is important in Asia. And to answer for Asia, we wanted to look at China for sure, but we also did not want to just deal with China as different from the West. We wanted to say, how different is China from Taiwan and Korea and Japan, which share a general Asian cultural history, religion, family traditions, stronger families. So we have family strength and as one. We have Buddhist and Hindu religion as Confucianism as potentially transformative factors. We have the Communist Party. We have the level of economic development. We have education. We have the internet now coming in. All of these things make a difference, and they all can change for individuals and for neighborhoods and for cities. And all of these factors are at work inside China, inside the US, inside Japan as well. So you're all right to raise this immediately and say it's complicated, but we have a lot of researchers who are trying to make sense of it. And so I guess maybe I should leave it at that point for now, and just to say this is an open question which we'll be discussing off and on in several later sections of the course. So maybe it's better to bring in a little bit more, but it's great that these are something that you've immediately brought into discussion. I guess maybe one more big point is the dynamics of where and how, who leads, or where and why one set of factors may be more important. It may often be, looks as if, based on the analyses we've done, may be different in China from Chicago and from other places. Although, in many ways, Chicago is closer to China than it is to the rest of the United States. Why do I say that? Because the immigration patterns in Chicago were such that we did not have a large white Anglo-Saxon Protestant majority. We've never had more, I think the number was, we've never had 20% of Chicago residents who were white and Protestant. We had African Americans who were Protestant, but Chicago's political culture is white Catholic. And the Irish have really set the tone more than any others to fight against the little Irish wards. Within their wards, they were very powerful and dominant. And Anton Cermak organized the Cook County Democratic Party to coordinate and also to fight against the narrow specific Irish wards. So in 1931, he was elected mayor, and then Roosevelt was elected right after that, 1933. So we'll talk more about this within Chicago, but I'm making the simple point that Chicago was not New England as discussed by Tocqueville, and Chicago then, with the Irish Catholic general history, and the specific role of the Cook County the strong, dominant, visibly, openly, explicit in public discussion. One classic example that is the explicit authoritarian style of the Cook County Democratic Party also was a huge exception within the U.S. It's the strongest local party in the country. So in that way, asking how much does a strong, dominant political party can this transform it? So within Chicago, you had frequently, in 15, 20 years ago, local neighborhood organizations would be discussed and categorized as independent or good, whatever. That is, independent meant independent of the Cook County Democratic Party organizations. And when after the 1968 Chicago Democratic Party convention, where there was famously a battle between student protesters and others outside the convention hall, and Mayor Daley had the police drag them away. The national media covered that, and there was great discussion as to whether the city was being too heavy-handed and the political party was not letting this happen. The National Democratic Party then required that all local Democratic Party organizations include a man and a woman to co-chair every local Democratic Party in cities in the entire United States. Mayor Daley then appointed Jane Byrne, the co-chair of the Democratic Party of Chicago. And when she then ran for mayor a few years later, she gave a lecture to 20 of us or so who were mostly political scientists at all the universities in Chicago. She talked for an entire hour about what she did as co-chair of the Democratic Party, and her main job was to destroy the independent organizations. And she felt that this was a proper way to present her Democratic political party expertise, as well as her caginess, her trickiness, her inscrutability, and her manipulativeness in ways that we would respect and support her. So I'm saying it shows the sense. It's a long answer to the same question that was posed to Mayor Daley 1. The Cook County, the press, the Tribune, the Sun-Times said, "Why did you give those contracts to your own son's insurance firm?" Who can tell us what the famous or the infamous answer was of Mayor Daley 1? Any of you? Some of you have got to know the answer, but it's a very interesting question. And ask yourselves first, what would the mayor of your city, if you're not from Chicago, and most of you are not from Chicago, but what did Mayor Daley answer that question? Do we have a student who can tell us? Just click on, just go ahead and speak if you can unmute. Okay, we have, I don't know, can we see how many students do we have here today? We have 57 students, okay. Not a single one of you can answer that, okay. How many, well, anybody who's lived in, all right, so the answer was, let's say, at least the alleged answer, the famous answer, not 100% clear if these were exactly his words, but almost his exact words were It is a father's duty to help his sons. Of course, I gave the contracts to my son's insurance firm. So, and he said this while he was mayor and while he was chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party. He held both positions simultaneously, and he was father of his family. He saw no conflict among those three positions. He was proud to say it's a father's duty to help his son. So in that sense, he is saying clientelism and patronage in the Chicago style is legitimate in this city and for me, and I'm happy to talk about it. And he did. He would regularly campaign on these issues as he went around Chicago, and as did, in that respect, so did Jane Byrne. She said, my job as Cook County chair was to destroy the independent organizations, and here's how I did so, and I'll tell you more detail. But on the other hand, she then said that this is not very long ago. I had aldermen come, I had my own alderman, I had many aldermen come to class. We're doing an oral history where we're talking to people. We got over 1,000 pages. You can click on the sites on our syllabus and see interviews with Cook County Party chairman, with aldermen, with others. But then it is changing. So the revolution was the election of Mayor Harold Washington. Harold Washington, as soon as he was elected, he was, that is, in his campaign, and then afterward, he attacked the patronage style of Daily One and of the Cook County Party. So but this is still going on. We have aspects of this going on within Chicago, but I'm telling this to you because most of you are Americans, but you don't know how far Chicago, in terms of the national image, is closer to the CCCP in China. That is, the Chinese Communist Party. It resembles the Cook County Democratic Party in ways that we understand China better because of studying what's happening in Chicago. So my answer is, don't just talk about China and America. Look at variations from city to city, from neighborhood to neighborhood, because we have in Hyde Park and on the north side the bastions of independent organizations fighting against the party through the whole 20th century. That is, the University of Chicago has often had a faculty member or an activist who've been trying to change things, and we now have a mayor, and her main program, which she ran for and won on, was, I want to change everything. That Toni Preckwinkle, who she was running against, is today is president of the Cook County Board. She's a former student of mine. Everybody thought she would win. She was beaten by Laurie Lightfoot, and Laurie Lightfoot came out of nowhere and she just said, I'm against the establishment, elect me. And she got elected. So in that sense, there are a lot of people who are voting, but who are also participating, who are active in different ways, that make this Chicago right now a fascinating place to study, to try to answer that very complicated question, which you have rightly posed here. And so, as in this class, as in Chicago's citizens, how to theorize, how to capture, how to measure, how to compare different forms and types of participation is one of the things that many of these papers are doing. And it's not an easy yes/no answer. That is, we can look at voting, we can look at membership in organizations, we can look at interest in civic activities, we can do questionnaire studies, and all of these are being done. And we will be reviewing some of this as we proceed. But the simple point I'm making, it's not a China West kind of question. This is an international question we all have to address. And the fact that 2 of you or 3 of you who have spoken on this from China have given somewhat different answers, that makes it interesting. Okay. Other and any other questions? That is well, I'm hoping that we can engage. That is, I have tried ever since Tiananmen Square decades ago. I have deliberately to try to make my courses, all my courses, but especially the political sociology course and then other courses, less Western specific. So I lived in France for years. I worked in Yugoslavia, but I had not worked in Asia. But Asia is more, so I've deliberately tried to have Asian and especially Chinese teaching assistants for over 20 years. And I've learned from them, because what I've tried to do, and I'm illustrating this right now, is have a question like that and then say, how would what we have said, say in discussing Tocqueville, discussing Chicago, how would that be different in China? And so lots of smart Chinese students and teaching have worked as teaching assistants and tried to bring us at least some sense of how things are. And then in a minute or two, we can let Tony Wang follow up with some of this. But Kiji, do either you personally have any more follow-up comments on what we've said, or so let me ask Professor Kiji if you want to comment first, and or does any other student want to raise or address any of the questions which she raised? We've only talked on one or two. She's raised lots of things, but the general point I'm making is that I hope we can engage Chinese students, and especially Professor Kiji, to actively discuss with us week by week by week, how would this and how is this different in China, and or how can we tell? If we don't know, how can we do some kind of analysis with what kind of data that can answer the kinds of questions which I'm delighted to have us pose and address right here, as these are central to the course. Any other student questions or comments? And then why don't we let Professor Kiji give one, not final, it means that I hope that's my point. We want to engage her on a continuing basis, but then the next speaker will say more about China too. But any questions from students right now before we proceed? Okay, Professor Kiji, any other remarks on any of this, especially say Chicago?
There are two questions asked me, and I want to add some points.
Please.
And why the participation in China are different from American or other countries. And there are three examples, and they concern different paths. The first is about different culture. Just because you mentioned the church is a location, is a place to get together people to participate in. But in China, most Chinese residents lack of spiritual place. So I think religion is an important force to promote people to participation. But in China, most Chinese people don't have any religion, spiritual. This is the first. And the second, I think, is some factors about our systems. Just because in most Chinese neighborhoods are governments or by the residential property, and the property is a commercial institution. So the residents are unwilling to pay more property fees, and the property doesn't have enough money to hold the cultural activities. And residents are living here, they want cost less money, but they want to acquire more. And this is the conflict about the traditional culture and modern culture. And the last reason is because of the ideology. Because in China, if you want to hold cultural activities, it's very difficult to the approval process for holding a cultural activity is too difficult and too complicated, and it needs a long time, and it's difficult. If you get together a lot of people, and it concern about the space safety. So a lot of governments will not they disagree to hold some cultural activities. So after several times, there are a lot of cultural volunteers. They want to hold some cultural activities. But if you use the cultural public space, it's really very difficult to approve. We also have some programs. We want to have some exhibition in America, but it's easily to be approved by the local community. Yeah, so I think culture and the system and the ideology, such as the residents' viewpoint about culture, in these three aspects are different from other countries. Yeah, so I just add some.
Professor, can you turn on your mic?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ziling Cheng has raised her hand, but thank you very much, Kiji. That's adding again some quite important points, which 2 or 3 of which we will discuss as we continue, and we'll read more through the course. But Ziling Chen has a follow-up.
I just want to make some comments because I feel like Professor Kiji was talking a little bit like overgeneralized, because first of all, when we talk about the religion in China, just in case a lot of people in this class who are not familiar with China, actually there were a lot of vernacular religious practices and vernacular beliefs, such as people in Canton. So that's a province in the southern area. So they actually do a lot of like this kind of local worships in temples, like on specific dates. So those kind of cultural gatherings or this kind of vernacular cultural practices are quite evident in certain provinces, but it's not like a universal thing in China. So I just want to point out, when we talk about China, especially on things on terms of like culture and religion, we have to specify which region or even which ethnic group we are talking about. And talking about the ethnicity, especially like China has 56 ethnic groups. So definitely in different ethnic communities, they have their own different cultural practices, and that's like we can't just generalize them into one. And the other thing I want to talk about is that a lot of cultural institutions, such as theater, is nationalized in China. It's not like Broadway shows we watch here in Chicago or in New York. Those things are like privatized. But if you want to watch like Peking opera per se in China, those kind of theater is nationalized. So in order to watch those kind of shows, those kind of performances have to be nationally organized or nationally owned companies. So, but it doesn't also stop the fact that in certain coastal provinces, like different forms of theater were also rising, countering this kind of nationally owned theater forms. So I just want, maybe the point I want to say is that China is very huge. Like we can't just say like one institution or one form of cultural practices is universally the same throughout or across the whole China. I guess that's my point.
Okay, for sure. And that's what I tried to say, that we'll cover more in the course, and there are 60 papers we heard from many other countries articulating with data of many different sorts, responses or concerns, elaborating your very comment here. Okay, my suggestion is we illustrate, again, continuing these same issues. Tony Wang, who has been working on this on his master's thesis in the MAPS program, and maybe just mentioning a little bit about Tony. Are you there? Can you maybe unmute and show us your face?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Okay. Could you maybe briefly introduce yourself, and then let's have some follow-up discussion. And I think you have two big themes. One is nightlife, and the second is scenes research. So he's made two long, excellent presentations. How do you want to proceed today? What's the best way to proceed?
Yeah, I have a PowerPoint that I can show everybody. So I can just share my screen a little bit, I guess, for that.
But are do you want to do both of them together? Do you want to do one, then the other separately, or how?
Well, I just put them together in one PowerPoint.
Okay, no, that's
I
fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Well, why don't you go ahead with that, and
Okay.
why don't you just maybe just briefly introduce yourself with your own personal background of when you've been in China and in the U.S. and so forth.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Tony, and I was born in Beijing, China. So as Professor Clark has said, I'm a master's student here at Chicago. But before that, I was in China. I grew up in China until high school. So I went to high school in North Carolina in the United States, and then I went to university also in the U.S. in Virginia, and now in Chicago. So I have had a quite sort of complex cultural background in terms of being in different places and seeing different places and culture dimensions. So personally, I've been trying to work on this master's project on combining scenes theory with culture industry research in China, especially with the specific topic of nightlife or the night economy, which is becoming a very important policy spectrum especially in recent years. So I will proceed to my presentation.
Okay, just move your cursor. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit more on what Dr. Chiji has already presented, a little bit on scenes and amenities research that's been done in China, and a little bit more on some of the research that I've done about nightlife as part of my project. I'll try to be very brief here since we don't have a lot of time. So to begin with, I wanted to start with this phenomenon in China that's called the Ant tribe. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, but this has been going on in the past decade or so. That's young university graduates who choose to live in metropolitan Beijing and other sort of large cities, Shanghai and Guangzhou, coming from more rural areas or smaller cities, but living in sort of near poverty existence that are underemployed, underpaid, and sort of, as you can see in the picture, very tiny apartments with expensive rents and often very far from the city center at their jobs. And sort of people have been trying to figure out sort of what is driving these people to pursue these these opportunities in these large cities where they could actually live in a much more comfortable, larger living space and back their hometowns in smaller cities and maybe get paid even more. And so that's part of sort of when amenities and scenes sort of come into place. And sort of one of the main ideas in the Scenescapes books, as I'm sure emphasized by Professor Clark, is that in the post-industrial cities, scenes and cultural values and lifestyle choices are becoming much more important and important drivers for where people end up, how they pursue their jobs and their living conditions. Instead of sort of traditionally people are more driven by jobs and income, now they wanted to live like tourists, like in a beautiful scene, in a beautiful sort of place. And how has this phenomenon sort of been developed in China, and how is China different from that? Well, some of the scholars have actually tackled this problem, and for example, Wu Di in 2013 has found that for data from 35 big Chinese cities, younger Chinese are attracted to very different sets of values and cultures as represented by different urban scenes than their parents, and they have made very distinct residential choices due to those sort of cultural orientations. Also, a different study has found that people and Chinese college graduates especially value culture scenes and culture dimensions way more than jobs and income, especially in their post-graduation settlement decisions. And some of these cultural dimensions include a challenging environment, a vibrant social and political atmosphere, diversity and self-expression. And all these sort of fall under the general idea of placemaking and how to create an urban scene, whether it's using amenities or specific atmosphere to attract these younger and more highly educated people and sort of this human capital and into your city. And that in turn sort of promotes urban growth as Wu Jun's work in 2019 has shown that regional GDP and innovation are both strongly and positively correlated with a number of cultural amenities. And he found this to be the case in Beijing. And sort of moving on a little bit, we talked about sort of this general relationship between amenities and development, but what is sort of the general distribution of amenities and sort of what are we lacking in that regard? Well, Wu Jun's 2019 book has pointed out that, okay, so there are over 60,000 individual cultural amenities in Beijing, 16 districts, but 2 central districts, Chaoyang and Haidian, and as you can see in this map of Beijing, they are sort of quite 2 small geographical areas. They harbor over 49% of all Beijing amenities. So in the case of Beijing, most of the cultural amenities are highly congregated and concentrated in these 2 geographic areas, whereas some of the suburb areas have as little as 300 or 400 amenities in that regard. So apart from just the geographical concentration, the types of amenities also differ in their distribution. And Wu Jun has outlined 8 types of cultural amenities ranging from food to living to leisure, beauty, and sports. And food-related amenities in Beijing currently makes up about 42% of all Beijing amenities, whereas the combined number of food, beauty, living, leisure makes up over 94%. So we see that there is actually a lot of sort of room for improvement and for diversification in terms of cultural amenities and that is sort of the work to be done by cultural policymakers and scholars alike. And another sort of important dimension that the scenes idea add to China's policy is sort of this general failure of previous cultural policy orientations. And one of those is this sort of state-led expansion of large-scale cultural industry quarters. And as you can see from the chart, these really took off, sort of skyrocketed since 2002. From only like say 40 in 2002 to over thousands, 2,000 in 2014, 2015. And this is sort of China's general state-guided policy development in order to induce local, regional cultural consumption and cultural cultural production. And so these cultural industry quarters are close clusters of cultural enterprises as well as financial firms that congregate creative individuals. However, there is a big problem with these large-scale amenities in that over 90% of them are in deficit, and they have very low occupancy rates, according to studies. And scholars have mobilized theories of scenes and amenities to try to account for that. And so they pointed to really the lack of amenities for residence, socialization, entertainment, and consumption. So the lifestyle amenities that make these places attractive both to the workers and to the local communities. And so the solution, and many scholars have pointed out to this, is we should furnish these once isolated industrial clusters with art, with residence, with lifestyle amenities, with cafes and restaurants or bubble tea bars, so that people enjoy working there and they live closer by, and then the communities nearby can have a greater incentive to join in and create not just an isolated sort of sector, but a vibrant, creative community. And that should sort of a solution to the current problem. And that was sort of a very quick overview of some of the sort of bigger trends that has happened in China's scenes research in past years. And I also wanted to add a little bit about my work that I've done about China's night economy and nightlife and how that factors into scenes and amenities. So there has been a recent national placemaking policy to foster night economy and nightlife culture in China. And since 2019, numerous cities have issued comprehensive and culturally-oriented policy documents to promote vibrant scenes of nightlife. And this is very important for China, which is sort of country that is experiencing some sort of steadying up of its GDP growth and is finding more ways to boost its consumption, as well as sort of the increased importance of culture and cultural confidence in China. And as you can see, over 60% of all consumption activities in China today take place at night. And this just testifies to how sort of important this policy arena is going to become after sort of more budget and more sort of manpower being devoted to this. And I have a short video that is specific to Beijing. Just some of the work that I've been done. How do I, let me see. Okay, oh wait, not this. Okay. Is everybody seeing the YouTube video, or is that showing up?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, yeah, so just play this for a little bit. Okay, let me just get back to PowerPoint. Okay. So as you can see, this is very much a, I mean, this is just for Beijing, but this is happening all over China and many of the large cities. But this is very much a placemaking project, as we've been talking about in this class, and sort of combines sort of lighting, restaurants, amenities, shopping malls, and to make these nightlife neighborhoods or spots attractive to people and sort of make Chinese citizens come out at night and consume and enjoy their nightlife. So personally, I've done a little bit of work in terms of sort of to better contextualize this nightlife phenomenon, because we all know that there is this huge policy initiative, but what do we know about Chinese nightlife in terms of its historical transformation as well as its regional diversification? So I made this little chart about sort of the different sets of nightlife amenities that have existed in these four major Chinese historical periods, and I just wanted to highlight a little bit sort of. So, for example, first of all, in the Song Dynasty, this was sort of the first time where night markets and night entertainment really emerged in China, and these included sort of traditional restaurants and as well as performance venues that in association with sort of just the general booming of commercial activities at night. And whereas in 1920s, after the fall of the Qing Dynasty and the Republican era in China, due to the foreign influences, foreign settlements, especially in the case of Shanghai, there has been a blossoming of the cabaret industry as well as social dancing, and these cultural influences have persisted until this day. And later we have the post 1949, the Cultural Revolutionary period, where most of the nighttime activities have sort of declined all around in China. And eventually the reform and opening up in post 1978, where we see just a proliferation and diversification of both local and global nightlife amenities, including traditional Chinese restaurants, Western restaurants, karaoke bars, nightclubs. As you can see from sort of this general table, the trend about sort of the existence of these nightlife amenities is clear. And just a little bit more on the regional variation, because we always sort of think about this big policy turn in China, this cultural turn, but in terms of nightlife, really there is a lot of sort of regional variation in terms of sort of which places have nightlife and which places don't, and that that really has a lot to do with sort of how policymakers should implement their policies. And so one of those factors that one of those facts is that there's much greater sort of vibrant nightlife in eastern sort of coastal regions in China than western regions, and much higher in southern regions than the northern regions of the country. And as you can see from this ranking, which is conducted by the Rising Cities Research Institute in China, they have used the number of bars, late night movie sessions, nighttime operations of public transportation, as well as mobile devices at nighttime, and combined these in terms of into nightlife factors, and ranked all 300 Chinese cities by these factors. And as we can see from this list, only Beijing and Xi'an are located north of the Yangtze River, whereas only Chengdu, Chongqing, and Xi'an are inland provinces. And so much of the nightlife sort of phenomenon has been prominent in the sort of the western and in terms of the eastern coastal areas as well as the southern areas, and this type of, I guess, contextualization in terms of regional diversification as well as historical transformation may help us sort of better get an idea of sort of just how large and diverse China is, and how to better implement this sort of vast culture policy perspective. And that really has to do with sort of regional variations in different contexts and different neighborhoods and cities. So I am still working on my master's thesis, and here are some of the thoughts that I have for now, and I'd love to hear you guys' questions or comments on this, and thank you very much for your time. Okay, so is that okay?
That was terrific. Questions, comments from anyone? Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
The big point of diversity, which we raised before, is clearly illustrated in your results. You don't have directly citizen, well, you have participation in the sense that of consumers, even if it's not voting, it's not political, but but what we're showing increasingly is that the political is we've shown in the last 5 presidential elections, this is in the Scenescapes book, these kinds of amenities and differential consumption activities are related in the US to the party differences in presidential voting. So where and how much this is also true elsewhere, we don't really know. But that's we have a paper in draft on support for Trump in different counties, in 3,000 counties in the US. But I'm just mentioning that to say we're not ignoring politics or civic participation at all, but a critical piece of the new populist activities, including Trump, Macron, Brexit, and so forth, include the kinds of things that you hear now presented with the nightlife and the discussions in China. But to see 60% of all consumption is nightlife, I did not know that in advance. I mean, that's huge, very, very important. And we haven't really paid attention. That is, I got an email just about 1 year ago from a lead planner in Los Angeles saying that she'd spoken to people at University of Southern California and asked them about nightlife. And they were writing to me as apparently the international leader on nightlife. And I had to laugh because I thought, boy, if that's the case, this is we need a lot more help.
We have a question from Lance Johnson.
Okay. Lance.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, do you have any like benchmarks to compare like the Chinese sort of nightlife consumption versus, other prominent countries like, European countries where nightlife between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. is also maybe a prevalent portion of the consumption period? Just any comment on that?
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't currently have that. I think that'll be an important thing that I should add to my paper sort of moving forward. Because the nightlife sort of policy initiative has been sort of recent and it's new in China, but it's been going on sort of for decades even, I think, in Europe and in other countries. And China is learning a lot from these places. And they have sort of mimicked a lot of policy initiatives to help Chinese nightlife grow. And yes, I thank you for that question. I definitely see that comparison to be important here.
Yeah, but I'll add, we've had others for about 2 years looking for papers, the best research we can find anywhere in the world on nightlife and related issues. And there's very, very little work. That is, we have not found any single paper, for instance, which could show you that for Italy, France, Spain, Greece, even though Italy, in the Southern European countries, the #1 industry in the entire country is tourism. In Italy, in Greece, in France and Spain, this is the biggest part of their economy. At least in what I have seen, we don't know the answer to the question. So we've got some rough studies, but this is very new everywhere in the world, is what I'm saying. And the Chinese may be ahead of at least equal and maybe ahead of the European countries, and certainly of the US. I mean, we just don't collect the data in the US for tourism and entertainment in a systematic way. The Southern Europeans do a lot more, but these are brand new, hard to answer questions is the quick answer. And so it's not the fault of, in one master's thesis at the university, to do what he's done already is more than most MAs at this university, I can say. So, but for sure, that obviously we do want to know that. We want to analyze it for sure, but the data are quite limited. So, other questions, comments, or advice?
Yeah, we have a question from Santiago Hafner.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, I can hear you good.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I wanted to know how centralized were the decisions on nightlife policies taken in China? Because I take the example of Paris. I'm from Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there has been like initiatives which are very centralized on Paris, whereas I imagine in China, which is bigger, then it might be different. So I just want what you know.
Yeah, that's a great question. I cannot answer for the whole of China because obviously it is a very big and diverse sort of the different policies have been going on in different municipality and different city. But for Beijing, there has been policies to implement sort of night mayors, and not just night mayors, sort of, I guess you can phrase it as night district leaders. So each district or I guess neighborhood would elect a person either from the businesses or from the local government to lead sort of these nightlife policy efforts to communicate among businesses and the government as well as local residents. And that shows sort of, at least for the Beijing government, how it is paying more attention to the bottom-up perspective of cultural policymaking, and which we have seen sort of how state-led and top-down policies have failed in China previously, and just to really how to incorporate the local context and how to incorporate ideas of culture and meanings and values, and how, just importantly, what they mean to the participants themselves and not to the government. And that is what is going to drive sort of nightlife participation most of all. And so definitely, I guess the answer to your question is in Beijing, there's been a lot of effort to diversify leadership and to separate how this overarching policy is done in different neighborhoods and different areas, and to accommodate for these differences.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Professor, remember to turn on your mic.
I just clicked the wrong. I just turned it off. Sorry. Within France, China especially, you have a private-public difference that's visible and strong between, say, the Ministry of Culture, the government. This was a question that we raised earlier. That is the government theater or government organized theater may follow clearly government policies and funding. The private little cafes, little cinemas, bookstores may be much more locally and bottom up, but how much and to what degree these two kinds of dynamics are more independent or separate, and which drives the other. And third, I guess most important, how much is it the individual citizen who is being responded to by either or both? And I will simply say this is a hot question, especially in France. That is, the US does not have a Ministry of Culture, so it doesn't, and we have a very small organization called the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, that we're working with. But we have such, the diversification in the US is much larger. We have cinemas and we have cafes, but we also have foundations and civic leaders and boards of individual civic associations like churches or theaters or museums that are neither government nor private profit-making activities. So that the diversification within the US makes it harder, but it also means nobody's collecting, but I'd say both within the US and within China and within France, the problem is the government tends to collect data about the government activities. And the private groups either collect no data or we can get data from them as businesses. But the smallest ones and some of the most citizen responsive activities may be not even 501c3s. And so what we've then returned to and what NEA has done, and the French do this, but the French do this better than the Americans or most other countries. The French ministry does a terrific survey and they ask questions. What are the artistic related cultural activities that you as a citizen participate in? So in that way, they pick up downloading from electronic media. They pick up Facebook, they pick up things like that. And they've done this now for over 10 years in ways that the National Endowment for the Arts has not. So in that sense, having some direct surveys of all citizens nationally, asking them what kinds of cultural activities are they engaged in, is an important part of the piece, because no one source of these data is enough or alone. None of these are right or wrong. They're all important, but they're all getting at different separate dimensions of the phenomena that we're talking about. So all these are good questions. I'm just giving you some of the complications and the need for building on the best examples that we have around the world. And the French, some of these French surveys are the best in Europe and the best and the best in the world. So the cities that we've been working in most actively include Chicago, which is the most active US city in doing things like this. Paris, where I've lived for 5 years. I did a PhD involving the French and taught at the Sorbonne twice. And then we've had a 3-year project with Steve Sawyer, funded by the mayor of Paris, and presented a report on Paris and cultural activities, cartography, which is on the syllabus in the bibliography there. Then we've worked with Seoul, as Seoul is 4 times as big as New York, and Seoul is really working hard to try to catch up with Milan and with Paris in a serious way. They want to be in the clothing design business. They want to sell computers they want to do industrial design like the Italians, and they're putting in lots of money in Korea. So, and now China, in a sense, is doing the same kind of thing as Korea, but they're much bigger, and they've got massive amounts of money which are going into this. But where and how to do it, they're turning to their own Chinese history, as you saw as you saw reviewed by Tony Wang. But they're also looking at Paris and Milan and New York and Seoul to see where and how they can learn good ideas. And we've been doing this kind of thing for over 30 years. That is, all of this stuff grows out of a project we started about 30 years ago called fiscal austerity and urban innovation. And one thing we've done is to try to get together academics, researchers, policy advisors with policy makers, with mayors, with governors, with national officials and ministries that are doing these things, and then talk about how we can help each other and where these new changes come from, how to measure them, how can we get better data and analyze it so it makes sense. But the quick general point I'm making is that these are shared concerns globally, and looking and comparing China with France, with other places is ideal. So I'm delighted to have you, Santiago, speak out. I hope we can engage you more. Could you just tell us a little bit more about your own personal background, and we can draw you out more for talking about Paris and France, as France is so important historically and today in these kinds of things. How much do you know about this more generally? We'd love to hear.
Well, I don't know any. I haven't read any papers or anything, but like from my personal experience, I come from the suburbs of Paris, and it's true that the mayor is really into providing cultural experiences, especially for young people. And when I was young, there was like lots of a project sponsored by the mayor that included a cultural place like soccer, a lot of soccer, and then also we would have during the summer we could go to the like a special place. I don't know how you would call it in English, but it's a special place where you go during the summer, and you spend 1 month, one entire month there, and you can do like lots of cultural activities. And I live in Paris, like in the small city near Paris, and in another city called Le Mans in France, and they have done that a lot. And I feel like maybe that's something that in Paris, the inside of the city, the inner city, it's less popular and people go less to that. But globally, in smaller scale cities, that's something that's very important for young people. At least that's my experience. We would spend like the whole month there, and we would have like people come in like for we would learn tennis, sports, different sports, also like painting and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's my personal experience there.
Okay, this is very powerful for especially Americans and others to hear. This goes back in France and in Germany. This goes back 30, 40, 50 years or more. That is, the unions, especially in France and Germany and some of the Scandinavian countries, first of all, they take the vacation very seriously. So France closes down the whole month of August, or Paris does. Yeah. Everybody goes on vacation. Second, the union would often take union members to a holiday location on a seaside, a beach. And then, as you mentioned, you'd learn tennis, you'd learn painting and so forth. So in a sense, this built solidarity. The idea behind this was, we will build political and community solidarity behind our union members. We can fight against capitalism better because we have the hearts and minds, and the songs which we sing include the Marseillaise and the International. And this has had an explicit cultural, amenities, and a political and a civic participation agenda built into it in ways it's a wonderful counterpart, similar but different, both from the US and from China. So hearing you talk about it immediately, unprompted, and at the same time, you're showing us something that Americans have never heard of before. Imagine, how many of you I know the answer. None of you in the US really have experienced this kind of thing to this degree of activity. As a student there, for instance, when I was a student in Paris, there was something called the JMF, the Jeunesse Musicale de France. You would get tickets for maybe $1 or less, and you could go to the top concerts, the top theater, all kinds of things. And maybe the first 5 or 10 rows in many of the opera, the best things, the most popular, expensive activities in France were heavily subsidized for students. And then when there was a great performance, the students would jump up and down, shout, cheer, scream. Wah! So in that sense, it brought the youthful excitement and engagement to the whole audience at the same time that the students were delighted to be there. And this was a great manifestation of a generous welfare state, which you could experience as a student, as I did at the time. Okay, so thank you, Tony. Thank you, Santiago, and let's try to keep building along these lines. Time is going on. Do we have? I think maybe we should turn to Brandon Sward. Brandon, are you with us? That is, we have a third teaching assistant who has just been approved, and so if he could introduce himself, I think we can hear. And second, he has a little bit of a presentation on what he's doing with his own work and ways that these might link to you. And let me just turn to Brandon, if we could, please. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have like a presentation prepared, but I'm a fifth year in the sociology department. I like work a lot on like art and how art is like related to like other things sociologists talk about. So I've had some work that I've done trying to think about how some of this stuff is shaking out in East Los Angeles, where there's been like a movement of like galleries into that area from downtown, where that have received a lot of resistance and sort of been pushed out of the neighborhood by the people who live there. So kind of thinking about like these debates around like gentrification and like what role art plays in gentrification, and thinking about challenges to traditional narratives of gentrification that proceed mostly along like race type lines. Right now I'm doing more stuff along in like international migration and like that kind of area, but I'm generally interested in also like Latin America and the Latin American diaspora in the US and elsewhere. Anything else? Were we gonna talk about the office hour thing, or?
Yes, please, that would be fine. That is one linkage. That is, most of you students are, based on the past, are probably going to take the 2 exams and probably not likely to do a big new paper. Some of you will. Some of you may be thinking about possible things you'd want to do for a BA or putting together. But let me point out that a BA in many good cases will emerge from 1, 2, 3 student course papers. So think about, if there's something which you're interested in, think about a possible course paper that could grow into a second theme. You could extend the theme in a second course paper that could become a BA thesis topic. And even if you're not thinking along those lines, all of us, and the people most active here, I'm now talking about me, Jimin, who hasn't really, we're going to try to let Jimin say a few words as well. Jimin, Brandon Sward, Kiji, we can meet with you right after the classes and have office hours, either with all of us together, or we may break out and have separate office hours. Brandon has not yet posted times, so that will be on the syllabus soon. And so you and he can think about when is a comfortable time, maybe different from that. But also, if you're really getting serious about a paper, we can talk with you individually and in more detail. But you don't need to do a full detailed paper, is my point. You can come and talk about some of this in office hours. And the other big thing is the discussion board. Brandon, you want to mention either office hours or discussion board and how you've seen it? Because you took an earlier version of this course. You participated very actively as a student in this course. when you earlier took it. So any comments on what you did or what students here might do, even if they're not doing a big paper?
Yeah, so I took a version of this class back in like 2017, I think. So it's, yeah, so we've been talking among ourselves around kind of like how to have and stuff like that. So one of my suggestions is that I could like populate, or we could populate the discussion board with a couple different either topics like gentrification or public art, or like people like Theaster Gates who are working in sort of somewhere in between art, social practice, and urban planning, design. And then also if you're interested in a particular case like Beijing or Paris or Chicago or wherever, and that could just be like a space for you people to like find each other and like have, we were having a discussion this class around some debates around like China and like what's happening in that case. So that could be like a way for you guys to like find each other, and then we could have like smaller groups outside of these large lectures that could be more tailored to either a topic or a geographic location. And you could come to those as you saw fit. And it's like they could maybe, be tagged to one of us who kind of works in that area or wants to take that on. And then, if that, leads into like an individual paper or like a group paper, that's great. And if not, if you're just interested in it, I don't think I at least wouldn't want anyone to feel like by participating in this way that you're like signing up to like do a big research project like right now. But that would certainly be a possibility that could come out of these kinds of meetings that I'm envisioning in my head that we can maybe start planning.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you, Brandon. Any questions for Brandon? Anyone who wants to raise here? I mean, he especially knows what he's talked about briefly. I mean, he's been very modest and brief. But let me add behind this, a big driver that I haven't explicitly mentioned is that artists around the world, and Brandon knows more about this than me, the artists of the world have become more engaged with social and public art. So not only do they paint paintings to go on a wall, I mean, they go into a city and they drape paper, they wrap paper all around the entire building of the Ministry of Culture in Paris. They have photographs of hundreds of people which are on top of some of the icons of Parisian classic patrimonial, that's the term the French use, the French patrimoine, the patrimoine almost implies it's a father figure and a parental part of our family. It's part of the national family. These are now wrapped with new public art photographs of students, of people who've taken street photos, all kinds of things which are in a sense trying to demonstrate that the Ministry of Culture both wants to continue the traditional cultural history at the same time that it wants to salute and present innovation, challenge, new things. And the French have been doing that most visibly since 1789. Okay. So more generally, not just in France, but also at the Art Institute, in many other places, artists are doing more of this. They're coming to society, they're coming to political meetings, they're coming to sociologists. And on the USC campus, the Gray Center, the Gray Family Center is right next to the Logan Center. I mentioned it briefly last time. It has a way of bringing artists to the campus for 6 months, for 3 months, and then working with one lead faculty member on something that may become a film, a paper, a book. That is, it's not just a one-time lecture. And this illustrates, in a sense, the seriousness of commitment to these things, which we find here. And this is brand new in the last 2 or 3 years. Okay. So, the artists themselves, of course, they don't know how to do fancy statistics, and they can ask questions to say, you know, what's it like elsewhere? But they need us just as we need them, and so that it's an excellent convergence. Any questions anyone want to ask Brandon, or about the sort of office hour idea, or cluster, what we could call them, say, clusters of interest, which could be on, say, public art, or China as an area, or Beijing, or Paris, or comparisons among tourist locations, or conversely, how is this being done among lower status, poor people? So we had a discussion in the other class just yesterday, which John Levy Martin was mentioning. Well, you've got these elite phenomena of high cultural, aesthetic differentiation, but then at the bottom you've got people who live only for their paychecks. And I said, wait a minute, John, live for paychecks? I live in Bronzeville. Poor guys in this neighborhood don't have paychecks. And what are they doing? What's in their minds? Rap music, which they make themselves, and basketball. They don't have paychecks. Okay, so the old Marxist idea, you know, of the proletariat is not the driver. There are lots of drivers, and that's what we're exploring right now. But in that example I'm giving you from a close, good friend and colleague, my pal, John Levy Martin, you know, and I are sparring in the class about stuff like this, about what's going on and how to interpret it. Okay, so rather than saying this is taboo, these are things we want to address, and and discussions among everybody on all these themes are how we all learn. That is, let me add one more point explicitly. 30% of what's in my head I've learned from students and collaborators like you in the last 10 or 15 years. That is, it changes. What you learn, you forget. I mean, you memorize some things, you're going to forget. I know I forget the details fast, but you've got to learn how to continually learn new things, and you can learn from people who are ahead of you or who are doing things differently, including people who are younger and who are more in touch with other things. And so Alan is sitting there very modestly. He taught me stuff for 2 hours last night, and I had a terrible time. Okay, so that's just one concrete, very visible example of dealing with Zoom, of where we need to learn from everybody, whatever our titles or ages are. So any questions following up for Brandon on this right now, although for sure much of this will be in the future as you think about it more. Okay, what if we call on Jimin and let him briefly introduce himself, as he hasn't done so yet, but he will tell us a little bit about himself and then about another set of activities which are on the syllabus for today. Jimin?
Hi folks. I'm Jimin Yoon. I'm from South Korea. I'm a third-year PhD student at Sociology Department. And as Professor and Brandon was saying, we're trying many things to encourage you guys to participate more. So if there's anything we can help with that, please just ask. And today I'm gonna just briefly talk about the Arts Public Life project and its director, Jacqueline Stewart. So the Arts Public Life project is a UChicago arts initiative which tries to advance and promote a collaborative relationship between the UChicago and the Southside's cultural and artistic communities. It's in a word, it's a platform for artists and access to art programming, to artist residencies, arts education, creative entrepreneurship, and artist-led programs and exhibitions. So for instance, for 8 years, APL has supported 26 artists to artists in residence programs. And last year, artists like Javius Boylan, Brandon Bro, and Amina Ross created new works during their 10 months residency at Art Incubator in Washington Park. And APA also facilitated youth programming with teaching artists and instructors. They also published some art books. And last year, they published Christina Franklin's Under the Knife and Avery Young's Neckbone. And they also provide theater residency program, which try to develop small-scale productions for small theaters and individual directors. And lastly, they provide exhibition program through cultural collaborations and innovative exhibition install techniques. And this, currently this is led by the director, Professor Jacqueline Stewart. She has been the director since the September 2019. And she's a lifelong resident of the South Side and also is a professor of cinema and media studies. And she earned her AMM and PhD in English from the UChicago. She's also the co-curator of the LA Rebellion Preservation Project at the UCLA, and also the curator of Cinema 53, which is a film series at the Harper Theater in Hyde Park. Another project that she has been working on is the Southside Home Movie Project, which was launched in 2005. It's a 5-part initiative to collect, preserve, digitize, exhibit, and research home movies made by residents of Chicago's Southside neighborhood. And it's a film preservation project and at the same time a visual history of Chicago's Southside neighborhood. And this is a interview of Jacqueline.
I founded the Southside Home Movie Project in 2005. I'm a film historian, and I was really interested to learn more about the kinds of films that regular people made on the South Side of Chicago. And I thought it would be a really valuable thing to try to collect it and preserve it. What we hope to do with these home movies is share them with people. These are films on celluloid, Super 8mm films, 8mm films. I mean, these are precursors to videotape, let alone the digital technologies that we use now. And they're really in danger of disappearing if they're not archived properly. We're building a digital archive so that people can look at our website eventually and pull up images of different parts of the South Side of Chicago, different communities, maybe different types of events, picnics or beach scenes or birthday celebrations. So researchers can look at it, but also anyone who's interested in the history of the city. There's so much development, redevelopment happening on the South Side of Chicago right now, really exciting projects. And it seems valuable to know what existed in these spaces prior to now. One of the things I'm going to be thinking about a lot as part of the CPA program is expanding the project to include videotape. Because once the camcorder comes on the scene and people are shooting 2-hour, 4-hour, even 6-hour tapes, and lots more of them, it's cheaper. and it opens up a broader range of family demographics. It seemed to me that this was a program that would allow us to really sort of map out a variety of business plans for this project, to think about other organizations that we might partner with in order to dig more deeply into particular communities that might be rich with this kind of material. And to really come up with some smart marketing plans as well. So I'm hoping that the program will help us to think about which connections make the most sense for us at this time. And I would want to know that people who'd be excited about supporting us know who we are and what we do, and help us to figure out the smartest ways to do it.
Terrific. Am I audible? Do you hear me, folks?
Yep.
Okay. I just realized we're way over class time. I'm confusing it with my other class, which goes until past this time on Tuesday. But we went over
a transitional home for women, because if you help a woman, you help a whole family.
Yeah. Maybe we can continue with a little bit more of that in the future, but we really should quit for now. We can have, I will say, office hours right now for any of you who want to just stay online. You don't need to hang up, just stay online for a bit. We'll close off the regular recording, please. And then that is not immediately, but as soon as we all sign off, and then we can, we'll continue on next Monday for the rest, for everyone else. Thank you very much, everyone who's participated so well.
Thank you.
Thank you.